The convoy stretched across 3 kilometers of open road, a long line of worn transport vehicles carrying hundreds of Velari families toward safety. Commander Alina Chen stood at the lead vehicle, her eyes scanning the horizon where dark mountains rose against a purple sky. The Velari homeworld had become a war zone, and these refugees were running out of time. Movement in the eastern ridge, Sergeant Marcus Webb reported through the comm unit. Thermal signatures suggest a raiding party, maybe 20 hostiles. Alina nodded, her jaw tight. The Velari were a peaceful species. They stood barely a meter tall, with soft blue skin and large, gentle eyes that reflected fear in every face she could see through the vehicle windows. They had never evolved for conflict. Their world had been safe for thousands of years, until the Krath arrived. The Krath were conquerors. They moved from system to system, taking what they wanted and destroying what they could not use. The Velari had nothing to fight back with, no military tradition, no weapons beyond simple tools. When the call for help reached Earth, the United Nations Response Force answered. Alina's team consisted of 32 human soldiers, veterans of Earth's harshest environments. They called themselves the Deathworld Warriors, a name given to them by grateful alien species who could not believe creatures from such a dangerous planet could survive, let alone thrive. "Tours, take a fire team to the eastern flank," Alina ordered. "Quiet approach. I want them watching, not engaging unless absolutely necessary." "Copy that, Commander." Lieutenant Maria Torres moved with 4 soldiers, their boots silent on the rocky ground. They were trained for this, for protection rather than conquest. The refugees needed to reach the northern evacuation point, where transport ships waited to carry them off-world. But the Krath controlled the direct routes, forcing the convoy through dangerous territory where ambushes waited at every turn. A small Velari child pressed her face against the transport window, watching Alina with those enormous eyes. The commander offered a small smile, hoping it would bring comfort. The Velari language was different from human speech, but emotions translated across species. Fear was universal, so was hope. "Commander, we have families asking about rest stops," Corporal Jake Morrison reported. "The little ones need food and water." Alina checked her tactical display. They were 3 hours from the next safe zone, a natural cave system where they could shelter for the night. The Velari could not travel continuously like humans could. Their physiology required regular rest, and their young ones needed even more care. "Tell them 2 more hours," Alina said. "We push until we reach the hollow caves. It is safer there." She knew the Velari elders would understand. They had placed their trust in human protection, a decision made from desperation rather than confidence. Humans were strange to them, loud and aggressive and built like monsters from their ancient legends, but humans had come when no one else would. The eastern ridge flashed with light. Alina's hand went to her rifle. "Tor's report." "False alarm, Commander. Natural gas vents. The heat signatures were geological." Alina let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Every shadow could be an enemy. Every sound could be an attack. She had led missions through war zones on Earth, through jungles and deserts and frozen wastelands where death waited behind every tree and under every rock. But this was different. This time, she was responsible for innocent lives that could not protect themselves. "You worry too much," a voice said beside her. Alina turned to find the Velari elder standing at her elbow. His name was Torvak, and he served as the convoy's leader, chosen by the families to speak with the humans. He was old by Velari standards, his blue skin faded to a pale gray, but his eyes were sharp with intelligence. "I worry exactly the right amount," Alina replied. "It keeps people alive." Torvak made a soft sound that might have been a laugh. "Your species is strange. You come from a world of predators and poisons, where survival requires constant vigilance, yet you use that strength to protect others." "Not all of us," Alina admitted. Humans can be cruel too. We have a long history of hurting each other. But you also have a long history of helping. That is what makes you different from the Krath. They hurt because they enjoy power. You help because you choose compassion. Alina considered this. She had not thought of it that way before. On Earth, she had seen the worst of humanity. War, crime, suffering caused by people who should have known better. But she had also seen the best. Soldiers who threw themselves on grenades to save their friends. Doctors who worked without sleep to heal the injured. Ordinary people who risked everything to protect strangers. Maybe that was what made humanity worth fighting for. The choice was always there, between cruelty and kindness, between selfishness and sacrifice. Humans were capable of both, and that meant every act of goodness was a deliberate decision. "The Krath will not stop hunting us," Torvek said quietly. "They have marked our species for extinction. Even if we reach the evacuation ships, they will follow us across the stars." "Then we will keep protecting you," Alina said simply, "for as long as it takes." The old Velari looked up at her, his eyes filled with something she had seen before in the faces of people who had been saved from impossible situations. It was gratitude, mixed with wonder, mixed with the first fragile seeds of hope. "Why?" he asked. "Your world is far from ours. Your people have no obligation to us. The Krath have offered no threat to Earth. Why do you risk your lives for strangers?" Alina thought about the question. It was something she had asked herself late at night when sleep would not come. Why did she volunteer for missions like this? Why did any of them? "Because we can," she finally said. "Because we have the strength to make a difference, and that gives us the responsibility to try. Back on Earth, we have a saying, with great power comes great responsibility. We cannot save everyone, but we can save you here today, and that is enough." Torvek nodded slowly. "Perhaps your world shaped you well, Commander. Perhaps the struggle for survival taught your species the value of life." The convoy continued moving, the transport vehicles creaking and groaning under their loads. Behind them, the distant sound of explosions marked the ongoing battle for the Velari capital. Ahead, the dark mountains promised both danger and sanctuary. Alina returned to her watch, her eyes never resting, her mind constantly calculating threats and responses. 32 humans against an army of Krath raiders. 300 Velari families depending on them for survival. 100 kilometers of hostile territory between them and safety. The odds were not good, but Alina had faced worse odds before. That was what it meant to be from a Deathworld. You learned to survive, no matter what the universe threw at you. And when you survived, you learned to help others do the same. The sun began to set, painting the alien sky in shades of red and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a Velari child began to sing, a soft melody that spoke of home and safety and the hope of tomorrow. Alina listened, and she made a silent promise to that unknown child. She would get them through, all of them, whatever it took. The hollow caves lived up to their name. Carved by ancient rivers into the heart of a massive cliff, they offered shelter large enough for the entire convoy. Alina directed the vehicles inside, organizing the Velari families into groups based on their needs. The elderly and the very young went deepest into the caves, protected by layers of rock and soldiers. "Perimeter secure," Sergeant Webb reported. "I have teams at every entrance, night vision equipment deployed." "Good, rotate watches every 4 hours. I want everyone sharp." Alina walked through the temporary camp, checking on her soldiers and the refugees alike. The Velari had set up their own systems of care, with mothers gathering children and elders distributing what little food remained. Despite their fear, they moved with quiet efficiency, a community pulling together in crisis. Private Sarah Kim sat near a group of young Velari, showing them pictures on her portable display. The children giggled at images of Earth animals, pointing at elephants and whales with expressions of delighted disbelief. Sarah spoke softly, explaining each creature with patience that Alina had not expected from the tough soldier. "They do not believe that blue whales are real," Sarah said when Alina approached. "They think I am making up stories." Alina smiled. To be fair, a creature larger than most starships does sound made up. One of the Velari children tugged at Alina's sleeve. She crouched down to their level, meeting those huge eyes without flinching. "Are there monsters on your world?" the child asked in broken common, the shared language of the galaxy. "Many," Alina admitted, "but we learned to live with them. Sometimes we even made friends with them. Even the dangerous ones. Especially the dangerous ones. On Earth, we have animals called dogs. They came from wolves, which were fierce predators that hunted in packs. But thousands of years ago, humans and wolves chose to work together. Now dogs are our best friends." The child's eyes went even wider. "You made friends with predators." "We are predators," Alina said gently, "but we chose to be protectors instead." She left Sarah with the children and continued her rounds. Near the cave entrance, she found a group of Velari males arguing in hushed tones. They fell silent when they saw her approach, their body language shifting to something between respect and unease. "Is there a problem?" Alina asked. One of the males, young and trying hard to appear brave, stepped forward. "We want to help. We want to fight." Alina studied him carefully. He stood barely higher than her waist, his arms thin and his muscles untested. The Velari had evolved for mathematics and music, for building and creating. Their hands were made for delicate work, not violence. "What is your name?" "Kessin." "Kessin, I appreciate your courage, but fighting is not the only way to help. Your people need you to stay strong, to keep them calm, to make sure everyone has food and water and hope. That is just as important as carrying a weapon." Kessin's shoulders slumped. "It does not feel important, it feels like hiding." "Then let me tell you something about hiding." Alina sat down on a rock, bringing herself closer to his eye level. "When I was young, my world faced a terrible crisis. A disease spread across every continent, killing millions. I was too young to fight the disease directly. I was not a doctor or a scientist, but I helped. I brought food to people who could not leave their homes. I stayed calm when others panicked. I gave my neighbors hope when everything seemed hopeless. That was fighting too, in its own way." Kessin considered this. "But you are a warrior now." "Because I had time to grow into one. You may become a warrior too someday if that is what you choose. But right now, your people need you to be strong in other ways. Can you do that?" The young Velari straightened, a new determination in his eyes. "I can try." "That is all any of us can do." Alina stood and patted his shoulder, then continued toward the cave entrance. The night outside was dark, lit only by distant stars and the occasional flash of weapons fire from battles far away. The Krath were out there, hunting, killing, destroying everything the Velari had built over thousands of years. She found Sergeant Webb staring at the sky, his expression unreadable. "Something wrong?" Webb shook his head slowly. "Just thinking about how vast it all is. A few hundred years ago, humans did not even know other species existed. Now we are protecting them from genocide on a planet 1,000 light years from home." "Does it bother you?" "No, it just feels strange sometimes. Like we have become something our ancestors never imagined. They were fighting for survival in caves, hunting animals with spears, trying not to die before they could have children. Now their descendants are standing on alien worlds, fighting for the survival of species they never dreamed of." Alina nodded. She understood the feeling. Sometimes the weight of it all pressed down on her, the incredible responsibility of being human in a galaxy full of species that saw Earth's people as both monsters and saviors. "Maybe that is how it should be," she said. "Maybe everything our ancestors went through, all the suffering and the struggle, prepared us for this, for being strong enough to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Webb smiled slightly. I hope we are good enough. We will find out soon enough. The Krath will hit us before we reach the evacuation point. They know this route and they know we are coming. Tomorrow is going to be hard. Then we better get what sleep we can. Alina agreed, but she knew sleep would not come easily. The faces of the Velari children stayed in her mind, their innocent trust in human protection. She could not fail them. She would not fail them. Inside the cave, the refugees settled into restless sleep, their dreams haunted by everything they had lost. Outside, human soldiers stood watch, their eyes piercing the darkness, their weapons ready for whatever the night might bring. The first attack came just before dawn. Alina was on her feet before the alarm finished sounding, rifle in hand, running toward the eastern entrance. Weapon fire lit up the pre-dawn gloom, and she heard the high-pitched battle cries of Krath raiders mixed with the steady crack of human rifles. Report. 15 to 20 hostiles probing our position, Tors shouted over the comm. They are testing our defenses. Hold the line. Do not let them get a visual on the interior. The Krath could not be allowed to see how many refugees were inside, how many humans stood between them and their prey. Alina reached the entrance and took position beside Tors, adding her fire to the barrage. The Krath were tall, nearly 3 meters high, with armored skin and multiple limbs that made them look like nightmares given flesh. They were evolved for combat, every part of their biology dedicated to killing. Against the Velari, they were unstoppable. Against humans, they had learned to be cautious. A raider charged the entrance, screaming in its guttural language. Alina put 3 rounds into its central mass, and it crashed to the ground barely 5 meters from her position. Another followed, and another, each one cut down by concentrated human fire. Then, as suddenly as it started, the attack ended. The surviving Krath melted back into the darkness, leaving their dead behind. Casualties, Alina demanded. None on our side, Velari all secure. She let out a breath. That had been a probe, a test to measure their strength. The real attack would come later with more raiders and better tactics. The Krath were not stupid. They had seen human soldiers before, and they would come prepared. Pack up the convoy, Alina ordered. We move in 30 minutes. They know where we are now and we cannot stay. The camp erupted into controlled chaos as humans and Velari alike scrambled to prepare for departure. Alina watched the eastern horizon, where the first rays of alien sun were painting the sky in shades of deep purple. Somewhere out there, the Krath were gathering, and somewhere ahead, safety waited for those who could reach it. She intended to reach it. No matter what. The convoy crawled through a narrow canyon, the walls rising high on either side like the jaws of some ancient beast. Alina did not like it. The terrain limited their options, restricted their movement, made them vulnerable to attack from above. But it was the only path that avoided the Krath's main force. How much farther through this passage? She asked Torvak, who rode beside her in the lead vehicle. Another 3 kilometers. Then the canyon opens into the Valley of Lights. Why is it called that? Torvak's expression softened with old memories. When I was young, before the war, we would travel there for festivals. The valley is filled with crystals that glow when the sun touches them. It was beautiful. Children would play among the lights, and adults would share stories of our ancestors. Alina tried to imagine it. A peaceful world, a peaceful people, celebrating life in a valley of glowing crystals. Now that same valley would be a battlefield if they were lucky enough to reach it. We will see it again, she promised. After this is over, when your people have found safety, perhaps you can return, rebuild. Torvak shook his head. The Velari do not think of rebuilding as you humans do. We think of transformation. When something is destroyed, it cannot be restored to what it was, but it can become something new. Our homeworld may never be the same, but our people will survive and we will create a new home, somewhere safe. That sounds like wisdom. It is necessity. We have had to learn acceptance of change. Your species fights against change, bends the universe to your will. Perhaps that is why you are survivors and we are refugees. Alina considered this. Humans did fight against change. It was in their nature, forged by millions of years of evolution on a planet that tried to kill them every single day. Adapt or die, fight or perish. Those were the lessons Earth taught its children. Movement on the ridge. Webb's voice crackled through the comm. Multiple contacts both sides. Alina grabbed her rifle and hit the quick release on her safety harness. All vehicles stop. Combat positions. The convoy ground to a halt, vehicles blocking the narrow passage in a defensive formation. Human soldiers poured out, taking cover behind rocks and transport panels. Above them, on the canyon walls, dark shapes moved into position. "This is a trap," Torres said, stating the obvious. "They knew we would come this way," Alina agreed. "They have been watching us." The craft did not attack immediately. Instead, a single figure descended the canyon wall, climbing down with the ease of a creature born to such terrain. It was larger than the others, its armored hide decorated with trophies taken from conquered species. A leader. Alina stepped forward, putting herself between the convoy and the approaching craft. Her soldiers tensed, ready to fire at her command. "Human," the craft leader rasped in heavily accented common. "You protect the prey. Why?" "They are not prey, they are people." The leader made a sound like grinding stones, probably laughter. "Everything is prey. That is the law of the universe. The strong take from the weak. The weak submit or die. This has always been true. It will always be true. Maybe where you come from, not where I come from." The craft tilted its massive head, studying her with eyes that held no mercy, no compassion, nothing but cold calculation. "Your world is dangerous. We have heard stories. Predators in every ecosystem, toxins in your very air and water. How did your species survive such a world?" "We learned to work together. We learned to protect each other. And now you extend that protection to others." The craft took a step closer, towering over Alina by more than a meter. "Strange behavior for predators. You should understand us. You should join us." Alina did not flinch. "We understand you perfectly. We just choose to be better." The leader stared at her for a long moment, and Alina could feel the weight of its attention like a physical pressure. Then it stepped back, making a gesture with one of its many limbs. "We will give you a choice, human. Leave the Velari and walk away. Your lives will be spared. Continue to protect them and you will share their fate." "That is not a choice. That is just two different kinds of failure." "Then you choose death." "I choose to fight for people who cannot fight for themselves. If that means death, then at least it means something." The craft leader stared at her, and for just a moment, Alina thought she saw something flicker in those cold eyes. Confusion, respect, she could not tell. Then the moment passed, and the leader began climbing back up the canyon wall. "We attack at midday," it called down. "Prepare yourselves, humans, you will need every second." Alina watched it go, her heart pounding in her chest. They had maybe 4 hours to prepare for an assault from high ground, with limited ammunition and limited options. "Commander," Webb appeared at her elbow. "Orders." Alina turned to face her soldiers, 32 warriors from a Deathworld, ready to give their lives for people they had never met before this mission. "We dig in," she said. "We find every advantage this terrain offers, and we show these craft what happens when they threaten our charges." A grim cheer went up from the soldiers. They knew the odds, they knew the danger, but they were human and humans did not surrender. The next 4 hours were a blur of preparation. Soldiers set explosive charges along the canyon walls, planted sensors at strategic points, and created choke points where the craft's numbers would count for less. The Velari helped where they could, carrying supplies and passing messages, and doing everything except fighting. Kessin found Alina during a brief moment of rest. The leader offered you a way out, he said quietly. You could have taken it. Alina shook her head. No, we could not. I do not understand. Your lives have value. Your deaths would help no one. Our deaths will buy time for the convoy to reach safety. If we fall here, some of you will escape. If we ran, all of you would die. Kessin was silent for a moment. That is a heavy burden. It is, but it is also an honor. To give your life for something greater than yourself, that is the best death anyone can ask for. We do not think of death as honorable. We think of it as an ending. Alina smiled slightly. Maybe that is the difference between our species. We have always known that death was coming. It made us value every moment of life, and it made us willing to trade our moments for something that matters. The young Velari reached out and touched her hand, a gesture of respect in his culture. Whatever happens today, Commander, my people will remember you. They will tell stories of the humans who stood between us and death. They will make sure your sacrifice was not in vain. Alina squeezed his small hand gently. That is all we could ever ask for. The sun reached its peak, and the shadows in the canyon disappeared. High above, the Krath began their descent. Alina raised her rifle and took aim. Here they come, she whispered. Make every shot count. The first wave poured over the canyon rim, a flood of armored bodies and flashing weapons. Human rifles answered with deadly precision, picking off raiders before they could reach the canyon floor. But for every Krath that fell, 2 more appeared. Alina lost track of time. She lost track of everything except the next target, the next shot, the next moment of survival. Her soldiers fought like demons, using every trick their Deathworld heritage had taught them. They fell back when necessary, held the line when possible, and made the Krath pay in blood for every meter of ground. Tors went down with a wound to her leg, dragged to safety by 2 soldiers who continued firing even as they retreated. Morrison took a hit to the shoulder but kept shooting with his other hand. Webb stood in the center of the formation, shouting orders and firing his weapon with mechanical precision. The Krath pushed forward, then fell back, then pushed forward again. They were taking losses they had never expected, losing warriors to creatures half their size. The Deathworld soldiers were not just surviving, they were fighting back. Commander, Webb shouted, the rear vehicles, they are moving. Alina risked a glance behind her. The back half of the convoy was moving forward, threading through a narrow gap in the canyon wall that she had not noticed before. Torvak stood beside the gap, directing traffic with calm efficiency. A second exit. The old Velari had known about it all along. Cover the retreat, Alina ordered. Everyone fall back by sections. Get the civilians through. The soldiers obeyed, pulling back in coordinated waves while maintaining continuous fire on the advancing Krath. The raiders pressed harder, sensing that their prey was escaping, but they could not break through the human line. Alina was the last one through the gap. She planted a charge on the canyon wall and detonated it as she ran, bringing tons of rock crashing down to seal the passage behind her. The Krath's screams of fury faded as she emerged into bright sunlight. The Valley of Light stretched before her, and it was everything Torvak had described. Crystals dotted the landscape, catching the sun and throwing rainbows in every direction. For one perfect moment, the war seemed very far away. Then Webb was beside her, supporting her weight as exhaustion finally caught up. How many? She asked. We lost 8, 14 wounded, but all the Velari made it through. 8 dead, 8 soldiers who would never see home again. Alina closed her eyes, feeling the weight of their sacrifice settle onto her shoulders. The evacuation point. 10 kilometers. If we push, we can make it by nightfall. Alina opened her eyes and looked at the valley, at the glowing crystals and the purple sky, and the convoy of refugees waiting for her command. Then we push, she said. We are not stopping now. The evacuation point was a wide plateau at the base of the mountains, where 3 massive transport ships waited with their loading ramps extended. Velari officials hurried about, organizing the incoming refugees and preparing for departure. Human soldiers from a second unit provided security, their fresh faces a stark contrast to Alina's exhausted team. Commander Chen, a young officer, approached, saluting crisply. "Lieutenant Park, secondary escort, we have been expecting you. My wounded need medical attention. Priority cases first." "Already arranged. Medical teams are standing by." Alina nodded, relief flooding through her. They had made it. Against all odds, they had brought the convoy through. The Velari families poured out of the transport vehicles, blinking in the fading light. Children ran toward the ships, calling to relatives who had already arrived. Adults embraced each other, crying with joy and grief and exhaustion. The old ones simply sat down where they stood, too tired to move another step. Torvek found Alina near the edge of the plateau, staring back the way they had come. "The Krath will not follow us here," he said. "Their forces are spread too thin. They cannot challenge your ships in orbit." "For now," Alina replied. "But you are right about what you said before. They will not stop hunting your people. This is just the beginning. Then your people will continue to protect us." Alina turned to face the old Velari, seeing the hope and fear mixed in his ancient eyes. "For as long as we can. For as long as you need us." Torvek reached up and placed his small hand against her cheek, a gesture of deepest gratitude in his culture. "You have given us something precious, Commander. Not just our lives, but our future. My people will honor that gift." "I am just a soldier. It is what we do." "No, you are more than a soldier. You are proof that the universe is not only darkness and death. There is also light. There is also life, and there are those who will fight to protect it." The first transport ship began powering up, its engines creating a low hum that vibrated through the plateau. Velari refugees climbed the ramps, looking back at the world they were leaving behind, saying goodbye to everything they had known. Alina watched them go, feeling the weight of the moment. 8 of her soldiers would not be going home. They would be buried here, on an alien world, far from the Deathworld that had made them strong. "Commander," Webb approached, his arm in a sling but his eyes alert. "We have orders. Once the evacuation is complete, we are to return to base for debriefing." "And then?" Webb smiled slightly. "And then there is another mission, another planet, another species that needs protection." Of course there was. The galaxy was vast, and there were countless species like the Velari, peaceful people facing threats they could not handle alone. The Krath were not the only predators among the stars. They were not even the worst. But humanity would be there to meet them. That was the promise Earth had made when it joined the galactic community. Not as conquerors, not as dominators, but as protectors. The Deathworld had forged its children into warriors, and those warriors had chosen to fight for others. "Get the wounded aboard," Alina ordered. "Make sure everyone has a seat. We are going home." The second transport ship departed, carrying more refugees toward safety in orbit. The third and final ship waited for Alina's soldiers and the last of the Velari families. Loading took another hour, a careful process of counting heads and securing belongings and making sure no one was left behind. When the last family was aboard, Alina walked to the loading ramp and looked back at the plateau one final time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep shades of crimson and gold. Somewhere in the distance, the crystals of the Valley of Lights would be glowing, a reminder of the beauty that had existed before the war. She thought about the 8 soldiers who had fallen, Morrison's friend, a private named Gonzalez who had died holding the line in the canyon, Kim, the young soldier who had shown pictures to the Velari children, killed by a sniper she never saw, 6 others, each with names and stories and families waiting back on Earth. They would be remembered. Their sacrifice would mean something. That was all anyone could ask for. Alina turned and walked up the ramp, which closed behind her with a solid clank. The transport ship lifted off, rising through the purple atmosphere toward the stars above. In the passenger compartment, her soldiers sat among the Velari refugees, sharing space with the people they had protected. The cultural divide seemed smaller now, narrowed by the experience they had survived together. A Velari child leaned against Webb's uninjured arm, sleeping peacefully. Tors, her leg wrapped in bandages, was explaining something to a group of curious young Velari who had never seen a human wounded before. Kessin approached Alina as she found a seat. "I have been thinking about what you said," he told her, "about being strong in different ways. And I have decided that I want to learn. When we reach our new home, when we have a chance to rebuild, I want to learn how to protect others. Maybe not the way you do, with weapons and fighting, but in whatever way I can." Alina smiled. "Then you have already become a warrior, Kessin. The weapon does not matter, the choice does." The young Velari sat down beside her, and together they watched through the viewport as the planet fell away below them. The scars of war were visible even from orbit, burned cities and devastated landscapes marking the craft's path of destruction. But there were also pockets of light, places where the fighting had not reached, where life still continued. And in orbit, a fleet of human ships waited, ready to protect the evacuation and carry the refugees to safety. "Where will we go?" Kessin asked. "There is a planet called New Haven. It was set up specifically for refugees, a place where different species can live together while they figure out their next steps. You will be safe there." "Will humans be there too?" "Some, administrators, medical staff, security personnel, enough to keep things running smoothly." Kessin nodded slowly. "I am glad. Your species frightened me at first. You are so different from us, so loud and aggressive and strange, but now I understand. You are not monsters, you are guardians." "We try to be," Alina said quietly. "We do not always succeed. Humans have done terrible things throughout our history. We have hurt each other and destroyed our own world and made mistakes that cost millions of lives. But we are trying to be better. We are trying to learn from our past. That is all anyone can do." The transport ship docked with a larger vessel, a human cruiser designed for long-range travel. The Velari families were transferred to comfortable quarters, given food and water and medical attention, and everything they needed to begin recovering from their ordeal. Alina gathered her surviving soldiers for a final brief before they began the journey home. "I know this has been hard," she told them. "We lost good people today, friends, brothers and sisters in arms. That pain is not going to go away anytime soon." The soldiers listened in silence, their faces marked with exhaustion and grief. "But I want you to know that what we did matters. 300 families made it to safety because of us. Children who would have died will now grow up and have children of their own. A species that was facing extinction has a future. We made that happen. We gave them that gift." She looked at each of them in turn, meeting their eyes, acknowledging their sacrifice. "When we get home, there will be debriefings and medical evaluations and all the bureaucratic things that come with every mission. After that, there will be time to grieve, time to heal, time to prepare for whatever comes next. But right now, I want you to know how proud I am of every single one of you. You represented humanity at its best. You showed the galaxy what Deathworld warriors can do when they fight for something that matters." Webb raised his uninjured hand in a small salute. "It was an honor, Commander." The others echoed the sentiment, their voices tired but sincere. These were the people Alina had chosen to serve with, the warriors who had answered the call when peaceful species needed protection. They were not perfect. They were not invincible, but they were human, and that meant they would never stop fighting for what was right. The journey home took 3 weeks, during which Alina divided her time between recovery and planning for future missions. The intelligence reports were concerning. The Krath were expanding their territory, conquering system after system, leaving devastation in their wake. Other species were calling for help, begging for the protection that only humanity seemed willing to provide. The United Nations response force was growing to meet the demand. Recruitment was up, training facilities were expanding, and new units were being deployed throughout the galaxy. Earth's children were spreading across the stars, carrying with them the lessons of their Deathworld heritage. When Alina finally arrived back on Earth, she took a moment to stand outside and breathe the familiar air of her home planet. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of the Velari homeworld. But this was different. This was home. Her comm unit buzzed with an incoming message. Orders for her next mission were waiting. Another planet, another species, another desperate cry for help. Alina smiled and walked toward headquarters, ready to answer the call once more. Because that was what humanity did. That was what Deathworld warriors were for.